Hello. In this series of videos, I'd like to explore some ideas that I've been thinking about to do with the evolution of learning. Specifically, I'd like to look at memes. Memes was an idea that was coined by Richard Dawkins in the Selfish Gene, and it's the idea that we can treat cultural evolution, the evolution of ideas as biology. Now, although I think this is a very good idea, I don't think it's really been explored as much as it could have been from a biological perspective, and that's what I'd like to do. Memes have certainly made popular culture. I did a Google search a couple of days ago, and I found 36 million links for memes. What I'm going to argue is that human genetic evolution has produced the ecological framework in which memes exist. They replicate and compete with each other, but that human genes have manipulated the environment in which memes exist for their own advantage, so that we produce ideas that are of utility value to genes. Now, I'm not saying that all ideas are of utility value to genes, but I am going to argue that this is probably why we have the ability to produce ideas. I think we have, if you want, two replicating systems that are intertwined with each other. We have the human genetic evolution, and associated with it we have memetic evolutions, and that these two memetic evolution, the evolution of ideas, and that these two replicating systems are interlinked with each other. Now, many writers on genes have kind of argued that the conditions necessary for memetic evolution and the conditions necessary for genetic evolution aren't quite the same. Well, for instance, Susan Blackmore argues in the meme machine that we shouldn't expect genetic evolution and memetic evolution to be exactly the same, that the conditions won't be the same for one because they're really quite different. However, I disagree. I think the conditions necessary for genetic evolution are likely to be very similar to the conditions necessary for memetic evolution. So before we explore that a bit further, I think it's probably necessary to say what genetic evolution is, all right, or what evolution is. Darwin's theory in its simplest can probably be stated as something like, in a population there is variation. Variation is passed from one individual, from one generation to the next as hereditable traits. There is a struggle for survival. Individuals compete with each other for resources, etc. Individuals that have the most appropriate variations, the ones that fit into their ecological niches the best, will tend to be more successful. They will tend to survive better, they will tend to reproduce more. And so these advantageous traits are differentially well passed on to the next generation. Over time, therefore, we will get change. Organisms will become increasingly well adapted to their environments. Okay, I think that's the basics of Darwinism. However, I think we need to add a bit more to that. In the very early part of the 20th century, there was a conflict, apparent conflict really, between the early Mendelians and the early Darwinists. The Mendelians had worked out that genetic information was passed in a particulate manner. We now call them alleles. And the early Darwinists thought that that was a problem, that they kind of felt that if things were particulate it wouldn't work. However, it was fairly early on shown that not only was it not a problem, but in order for evolution to be successful as a theory, information had to be passed on in a particulate manner which could mutate and change. And we got great contributions early on, like Weissman, who suggested the doctrine of the rigid separation of the immortal germline and the succession of mortal bodies. In particular, the doctrine that the germline could influence the form of the body, but the body could not influence the germline. And I think it was shown that this was going to be a fundamental feature of Darwinism. If this conditions, the Weissman conditions, could not be met, then evolution could not occur. It didn't make sense of the theory. And obviously one of the great powers of evolutionary theory is that it has been so hugely successful in predicting what we find. So if we look at the Weissman doctrine, we can see that when Watson and Crick discovered the structure of DNA, it explains the immortal germline is DNA. The reason that information can pass from DNA to the phenotype, but information cannot pass from the phenotype to the DNA, is explained by the central dogma of molecular biology, i.e. that information goes from DNA to RNA to proteins, and that the environment selects because of the phenotypic effects that those proteins exert. But there is no mechanism for information from the phenotype affecting the DNA. Now, people like Dawkins have argued that Weissmanism is a fundamental feature of Darwinian evolution, and I tend to agree with them. And I feel that this is something that we're going to have to expect in memetic evolution if memetic evolution is going to be successful as a theory, or that memes are a useful way of looking at human culture. Okay, in the next video I'm going to have a look at the problems to do with memetic evolution, and then hopefully after that we'll see if we can solve some of those problems. Thank you.